Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. It's morning here on the West Coast. It might be morning on the East Coast. And for those of you outside of the US, welcome, welcome, welcome. So, today I want to talk about clinical decision making in the play therapy process as it relates specifically to what kind of tools, using the metaphor of toolbox, what kind of tools are in your toolbox? So, what are your theoretical models that you're using? How are you applying those? What age you're working with? What percent of issues you're working with? And how are you using those tools with the different clients in your um, on your caseload that you're working with? Because you want to make sure that you're individualizing and conceptualizing what's going on with your client and how those tools are applied. So if you're joining me live, go ahead and post your name in the comments. Let's see who's here. Where are you from? What's going on? Who's joining today? If you're watching live, go ahead and post your name and where you're from in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And let's get started for today. So, if this is your first time joining me, I'm Kathy Spooner. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, registered play therapist supervisor, and I've got almost 30 years in the mental health profession working with children, adolescents, and families. And I love using play therapy and expressive arts with my child and adolescent clients and their families because I really do believe that it is the most effective way to meet their unique developmental needs in the treatment process. And here's the thing. Play therapy is more than just pulling out games and toys and pulling out art supplies. And that's a little bit what we're going to talk about today is what makes it a little bit different based on your clinical decision making and the tools in your toolbox. Because when you're using play therapy and expressive arts with children and adolescents, you're not using an adult theoretical model. You're looking at it more and from a developmental framework of child and adolescent development and applying those types of interventions based on the theory and how that theory is geared towards your child and adolescent clients. So it really is more than just pulling out toys and art supplies. And I really think that's an important point. And because I remember I was introduced to play therapy back in the 80s when I was a special education teacher. And the school psychologist and the school social worker were using this thing called play therapy. This is like back in the mid to late 80s. And they would pull me in and show me what they were doing with blocks. And I would look at it. I was in my mid 20s thinking, they seem really excited. I have no idea what they're doing. Um, but I also ended up doing a group with the school psychologist using play therapy application with my class. And I absolutely got to experience the difference that it made for my kids and the difference that it made for their relationship with me as a special education teacher of children who have behavioral problems. So think about it. What's a special ed teacher with behavior? Back in the 80s, we did a lot of behavior modification. It was all about behavior, behavior, behavior. Well, from a kid's point of view, grown-ups rule the world. So how nice through the play therapy process to give them that space to work out whatever they need to work out, including grown-ups rule the world and I don't have any power. And in play therapy, they get to have power. And just seeing how that changed my relationship with the kids in my classroom, I was hooked at that point. The thing is, though, this was before the internet, so it was really hard to find trainings and things like that. Once I got my master's degree in social work, I had no idea where to find play therapy, so I was just kind of winging it. And I'll be honest, it felt horrible because I didn't really know what was going on with my clients. I didn't have a theory model that I was using. I was using games and I was using art supplies, and I really didn't know what I was doing. And I knew there was a better way. So eventually I was able to find that. So there is a difference. And for me, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is helping child and adolescent psychotherapists really understand play therapy and integrating expressive arts and using it effectively. And that includes our clinical decision making process. And what most of us will use an integrated approach. So I call it the tools in my toolbox, so to speak. So most of us will use an integrated approach. We still need to use that clinical decision making process with whatever it is that's going on with our clients and the interventions that we're using to help them. I always say to the people that I supervise and my clients, actually, and their parents, my job is to work myself out of a job, meaning my job is to help you, my clients, help your clients really um, resolve whatever it is that's going on for them, to help them successfully discharge from treatment, to graduate from treatment. That's the goal. The goal is they're not going to stay with me forever. So I need to use a framework and a clinical decision making process to help them get from the beginning of the treatment through the middle of treatment, which is where all the really hard work happens, to successfully completing treatment. So, FYI, full disclosure, my dogs are in the room with me today. So, if you, I can already hear them. If you hear weird ticking and just weird noises, that's my dogs. They're already making weird snorting noises in the background. So, anyway, that's my dogs. Um, so, anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about using strong clinical decision making with the tools in your toolbox, because the clinical decision making process helps you answer questions like, is this model a good, is this play therapy model or expressive arts model, is this a good fit for my client? How does this model apply or use that therapeutic relationship in the treatment process? Because that may vary based on your clinical model that you're using. And then also, how does that model fit with the age and developmental issues that the developmental stage where my client is right now? So those are the things that you want to think about with clinical decision making when you're figuring out what tool to use. So first and foremost, if you're here and you're joining me live, go ahead and post your name and where you work in the comments. What theoretical models do you use if you're working with children and adolescents? If you've not yet been trained in using play therapy and expressive arts, have you been introduced to it? Have you tried using play therapy and expressive arts? How has that gone? So post those in the comments below. Alrighty, so first and foremost, I always say to people, this to me is a huge part of that clinical decision-making process with play therapy and expressive arts. Theory drives application. So remember, the play therapy process uses those therapeutic powers of play, and based on the theory model, will determine how those therapeutic powers of play, that is a mouthful. I feel like that's a tongue twister. Therapeutic powers of play. Say that 20 times. That'll be funny. How does that theoretical model use and apply those theoretical powers of play? Depending on what theory model you are using, it may be applied differently. So the tools in your toolbox are going to have a theoretical application to them. So you want, even when you're using an integrated approach, you want to make sure you understand the underlying theoretical principles of that model so that you can make sure that it meets the needs of your clients. So, and fits the presenting issues that they're coming to you for. It meets their developmental stage. It meets their age. You want to consider all of those kinds of things when you're integrating. And I may use a couple of different theoretical models in one play therapy session, depending on what my client is doing. And but when I do that, I also want to make sure when I've made that shift that I'm applying that intervention based on whatever model that I'm using. The other thing is, though, here's the thing. We need the theoretical model because theory drives application. Equally as important, one is one is not necessarily more important than the other, although you may be heavier on one and maybe not as good on the other. So you're always going to want to be balancing that out. Therapeutic relationship. I really like to use an attachment kind of framework when I'm thinking about the interventions that I'm using. And what I mean by that, with an attachment framework, I I want to make sure that I'm tuning into my clients. And the reason that I want to tune in is because I want to get a sense of my client's response to the intervention. So I want to, in order to do that, I have to get a sense of my client, their personality, how anxious or not anxious they are, or do they engage right away and get started, or they take a little more time to warm up, because that theoretical relationship first and foremost needs to establish a sense of safety and security in the therapeutic relationship in the therapy room. Because if we think about it from a neuroscience standpoint, we know that children can't actually people can't really engage in the play process unless their social engagement system is activated. In order for their social engagement system to be activated, their threat circuits need to be deactivated. That's the polyvagal Stephen Porges neuroception. So, in order for my client to engage in play, they have to first feel safe. Otherwise, they won't be able to engage. And you'll see that if you're tuned into your clients, you're going to see that how they respond to you, how far away they are, how close they are, how they are engaging in using the interventions or with the toys or tools in the playroom. You're going to see all of that if you're tuned into them. And then based on that, when you're tuned into them, then you'll get a sense of their needs in the treatment process. That's going to help you with that clinical decision making. You're going to get a sense of how well that the interventions are working. Are they working or not working? We've all done this. I mean, nobody ever does it perfectly all the time. This is one of the things in my supervision group so I have an online supervision group. We do these all, we discuss these all of the time. We'll discuss clients. We'll do that clinical decision making, what's going on with them. Are the interventions working? Why or why not? Are they using the interventions accurately? So we have a LinkedIn user, and LinkedIn user says, I work in schools, adolescents, and I'm an integrative therapist. I think most of us are. Yeah, most of us are. That's awesome. Using drawing, Santray, lyrics. That's awesome. That's so you must work in like a middle school or a high school. That's great. Do you have like a favorite modality that you use with your clients? Any of those? I love using Santray. Those are so cool. What was I? I got lost. Well, which is another thing. it happens to us in the treatment process. If we are not doing our clinical decision making, we can get lost and we have to regroup. Um, like I was saying in my online supervision group, we'll staff cases, and it's not uncommon that we get lost. The thing is, if we have a framework that we're working from, then that helps us get back on track and figure out what tools are working or what tools are not working and what works best. Like I've had clients that I've worked with and I've tried uh, an intervention and it has not worked well. So I have to, that gives me information though about my client and what's going on. And then I'll use that to help me with my clinical decision making to adjust as I go through the treatment process. And I want to think about, so the other thing is, I want to think about um, the tool at whatever intervention I'm using. I need to consider the age of my client, the developmental stage of my client, their personality. For example, if I am using, let's say I'm working with like a 5-year old, I like to use child centered play therapy with that age because I find that it works really well with them. Cognitively, socially, emotionally, a 5-year old is at a much different developmental stage than, let's say, a 9-year old. With a 9-year old, I'm probably going to do more of an integrated approach. I'll probably start out with child centered play therapy because I really think that's an excellent way to establish a sense of safety and security in the play therapy room. What I found though, if I'm as I'm tuned in to my clients, pretty soon they get irritated with the child-centered tracking and it begins. And if I find that it when they get irritated with the process, then they they don't engage so much with me and the therapeutic process. So then I'll use that. That's my clinical decision making. I'll use that to switch to something different, and um, and then I'll base that on what their presenting issues are, personality wiring. For example, if I have a really active 9-year-old boy, then I'm probably going to use more play based interventions, especially initially, because they're more active. They don't involve as much talking about feelings and processing, although boys will do that. Girls tend to get there quicker. Not all girls do. And girls tend to do more of the processing emotions, doing more art and centre in a different way than boys do. And again, it's not always that way. Sometimes it's different. That's why you have to tune into your client and make sure that you're adjusting to whatever their needs are. So I'll use child centered play therapy for the little ones because I think it best meets their needs. Um, and this, again, we talk about these things in my online supervision group. We'll talk about what interventions, we'll talk about what age, we'll talk about their personality wiring. We, of course, will talk about how to integrate parents. That's another thing, part of the clinical decision making. And what kind of tools do you have in your toolbox for working with parents? I think in the play therapy arena, we don't necessarily think so much about parents. That's one of the things that I found as well. Um, it's kind of my pet peeve also. And again, I did these too in the beginning until I realized they weren't working. And now I see it happen all the time. And I think to myself, oh, there's a better way. So, of course, the people in my supervision group are hearing this from me all the time, which is, um, how are you integrating parents, and what what model are you going to use when you're integrating parents? How often do you need to see parents? Do you need to just meet with them once a month and do more kind of parent coaching? Do you really need to integrate them in much more? And there's a lot of research that says more parental involvement and engaging parents in the treatment process, they children and adolescents have better treatment outcomes. And I'm not a fan I call them drive-through parent sessions or drive. At the end, we walk the child out. We think we're gonna like check in with parents, like 5 minutes in the waiting room. Which one, we're talking about things that may or may not be helpful to talk about in front of the child. Two, it's in the waiting room. And three, it's not, it's never 5 minutes. It's always more than 5 minutes. And we really need a dedicated time to have parents come in where we can really talk about what's going on, give feedback, get feedback from parents, form that therapeutic rapport with parents. They are the therapeutic agents of change. The child's not the therapeutic agent of change. They are not going to drive the change process. Parents are going to drive the change process. So we need to think about clinically how we're going to involve parents in the treatment process. We talk a lot about that in my supervision group as well. And a lot of the trainings that I do, um, we talk about how are you integrating parents into the play therapy process. In fact, I have a specific training on that I haven't done for a while. That this has come up so much that and people don't necessarily have a theoretical model or a framework in order to know what they want to do with parents. So I'm actually thinking I may do an in-person training. Online trainings are awesome. The thing is, you can't do more than 2, 3, maybe 4 max before, people in the training or you guys get kind of, like, glassy-eyed and it's not always enough time, 2 or 3 hours to get a really robust, thorough, solid foundation and opportunity to try things out and do that problem solving. So I'm actually going to be starting to do some in person and some online as well. Anyways, I digress. Um, so we want to think about the age and development of the kids that we're working with and the tools that we're using for that age and development. And then, so here's the thing. What happens if you don't use effective play therapy clinical decision making? The thing is, and this is based on personal experience as well, and because I do a lot of supervision, I notice this happens. It happens to all of us, and to me, that's why it's important to really think about these things and course correct, so to speak, which is what happens if we're not using those strong clinical decision making skills. We're really not as effective helping ourselves work ourselves out of a job, meaning we'll get lost in the process. The strategies we're using may or may not be as effective. If we're using an adult model and we're just pulling out toys and art supplies, what what theory are you working out of? Is it a child and is it a child friendly um, application? What I mean by that is developmentally, are we taking into consideration how a specific theory model is applied based on that age and developmental stage for my client? If we're not really accessing those therapeutic powers of play and understanding how that works and that way of being with children and adolescents from a child and adolescent framework, then are we really being effective? Because are we using an adult model on children because we pulled out games? And it really doesn't work that way. There's a whole shift when we are using play therapy and expressive arts. Oh my God, I can hear my dog digging in the background. So if you hear real weird noises and panting, that's my dog Lily. So the thing is, we can get lost. We're not going to be as effective. And oftentimes, and the research has supported this, kids tend to drop out of treatment early. One of my hypotheses, so to speak, it's not tested out anywhere in research that I know of, is that because we're not using the right model, we're not using a play therapy and expressive arts model with children, it's not going to be as effective and they'll tend to drop out early and they may even say therapy didn't work. So those are kind of the things that can happen if we don't really use a strong clinical decision making process with the tools in our toolbox. And if we're not really using play therapy and expressive arts modalities in the treatment process, we're using an adult model and we're pulling out toys. So that is it for today. Just as a recap, play therapy is more than just pulling out games, toys, and art supplies and using an adult lens to look at what's going on to help your the kids that you're working with, to help get them to play with you. It really is about using the therapeutic powers of play, accessing those therapeutic powers of play. Oh my gosh, my dog is so loud. I don't know if you can see Lily. Lily, stop. She's so loud. It really is about accessing those therapeutic powers of play, using a theoretical model, and then using your clinical decision making in order to apply those using that theory in the application. Theory drives application, and you want to think about different factors in your clinical decision making, which interventions you're going to use. You want to think about the personality of your child, the ability for the child to feel safe, how their developmental stage that they're in, and adjust your tools, your interventions, your models that you're using to meet the needs of your child, the child in your playroom. And that's going to help you. And you want to tune in and use that therapeutic relationship to help you figure out which interventions are going to work with your client. You're going to use that therapeutic relationship to help you see if it's working, to adjust as needed, to create that sense of safety and security in the playroom to help them engage in the play therapy process. And then finally, if we're not using really strong clinical decision making, then we're not going to be as effective and we may risk our clients dropping out of treatment prematurely. They may do that anyway for a variety of other factors. Our job, though, is to make sure that we're doing all that we can in order to help them get all the way through the treatment process successfully. And so if we're not using that strong clinical decision making, then we will probably get lost in the treatment process and it'll get derailed. It may not be effective. The interventions we choose may not be effective. So that is it for today. So that's a wrap for today. I do want to let you know I have 1 or 2 openings left in my online supervision group. So if you're interested in learning play therapy and expressive arts, the online group is a really great way to do that. You get not only my brain, but the collective wisdom and brains of the entire group. We share resources in there. We do a lot of clinical decision making. We do a lot of talking about which interventions to use, applying those and using those effectively, engaging parents in the process. So if you're interested in that online play therapy supervision group, you can message me, you can post something in the comments here, and we can set up a video call just to make sure the group is a good fit for you. The other thing is post in the comments what tools that you use with your child and adolescent clients in the post. Let's see which ones you use, what age clients you work with, what theoretical models do you use with play therapy and expressive arts. So that is it for today, and I will see you next time. Bye.